Hi there, and thanks for joining us for today's video webinar. I'm going to be talking to you about Premiere Pro Creative Cloud today, which I've installed through my Creative Cloud console that you can see down here on the right hand side of the screen. So that will be in the system tray on your Windows machine and on your Macintosh as well. I've got a variety of different Creative Cloud applications installed here, so most importantly Premiere Pro CC or Creative Cloud that we're going to be focusing on today. I've also still got the CS6 family installed. It's important to be aware that when you go over to Creative Cloud, all the old versions are still available to you. And that's important because Encore, frozen at CS6, if you want that installed, that's available actually through installing Premiere. So that's how you get access to Encore as well. So in the first instance, I installed Premiere Pro CC. Then you click on More Information, and it will actually take you off to a website like this, where you can, on the bottom left-hand side, this is your kind of dashboard for Creative Cloud, and your download center is here. If you click over here on Adobe Premiere Pro CS6, that's where it allows you to install those older versions. So they're always kept available for purposes of compatibility. So I'm going to start by looking at an application called Prelude, which we introduced in CS6, which is a very useful tool for actually managing large quantities of rushes. If you've shot lots of media, you've got gigs and gigs full of stuff, and you want to really kind of whittle it down to the usable bits and pieces before you proceed, Prelude is a great tool for doing that. So it performs 4 basic straightforward tasks quite efficiently and quite quickly. So ingesting, shot logging, shot listing, or rough assembling if you like, and rough cutting as well. And then you can output your pre-built sequences and pre-populated bins across to Premiere Pro. So when I hit ingest, we're able to look at all of our disks. So if I click down into, I've got some video footage inside CS6 assets. If I go down into tapeless media, you'll see I've got several directories full of different kinds of video footage shot with different kinds of cameras. So the biggest strength of Premiere Pro since CS5 and onwards is that we're a completely native editor. We natively support all file-based camera media of all different varieties and file types. Added in this new CC release, we've now got ProRes, DNX HD for export, so we support all full Avid workflows. We've got ARRI, XAVC, AVC200, and we just keep, increasing and improving upon the codecs that are supported natively inside our application. So if I go into here where it says I've got a folder called DSLR footage, go into there. I've got some footage shot by a colleague of mine, Richard Curtis, on his 5D, just in and around the centre of London. And you can see straight away what the system is doing is populating these thumbnails so that I can go in, and even though there's a wide variety of footage in there, he spent a couple of days shooting this stuff, I can just quickly go in and I can use the hover scrub tool to tell what's going on in each shot and quickly tell whether that's a shot I want to use or not. And so when the active shot itself will be highlighted, and you get a sort of dimming and vignetting on the inactive shots when you move away from them, a bit like Lightroom. So I can go in and I can pre-select these clips to be pulled across. What I can also do is select to transfer those clips to destination on the way in, but in this case I'm not going to. That wouldn't make any sense because the media is already on my disk. So I'll deselect that option, but suffice to say, if you had the camera card mounted on your system and you were browsing through it, you could use Prelude to do the copying for you, and it will do a full file verification as well of file size, or even a bit-for-bit comparison if you want to make perfectly sure that all of your media is actually loaded straight across onto your system. You can also do a transcode on the way in as well, so if you're shooting very high-res 4K footage, XAVC, Red, ARRI, or whatever you have access to, you might want to transcode and use a low-res proxy version for just being able to edit on the move. And then later on we'll look at our relinking tool, which actually allows you to easily relink between 2 sets of media. We've overhauled that greatly in Premiere CC as well. I can also edit the file metadata on the way in, so I could add different fields on the way in. If I go to here and go new preset, click add, I could say I want to add company, Adobe or something similar, and that will then bake that into all of your clips. I can also rename files on the way in. This is really essential when you're working particularly with DSLR workflows and you've shot multi-camera. If you haven't reset the numbering inside the camera itself, you may end up with multiple angles of the same name because they all tend to be called MVI underscore and then a number, right? So you've got 4 cameras, you could end up with 4 identically named files. So very useful to be able to rename them and add some kind of prefix to the naming using a preset again on the way in. Really, really good way to manage all of your clips. So as I said, I'll turn off transfer clips here simply because I have all this media on my disk already. So I'll just go ahead and ingest that stuff without actually copying the files over. and it just creates a basic pull list of shots ready for me to work with there. Still got the hover scrubbing capability, but now I can go in and I get a nice big playback window in which I can scrub, shuttle, stop, play, mark sub-clips, see? So you just hit one, and you can mark a comment in there as well if you want to. And that metadata will persist across when you save out those clips and send them across to Premiere. And you do that literally by right-clicking and going Send to Premiere Pro. I could build a rough cut in here as well, but for now I'm just going to move across and send those shots over to the project that I've got open in Premiere Pro. Save changes, there we are. So they've all appeared. Those 4 clips have now additionally appeared in my bin. So I've got a basic little sequence I've been playing with here, and I'm going to add some effects and some tweaks to this, and using some features that have been around for a while, but I think it's good to look at Premiere as a whole and to kind of look at some of the developments we've made along the way since CS5. So the biggest change we made back then was the Mercury playback engine. Now this is huge because this is the fuel that fires the engine of the software itself. This is what gives you all of that 64-bit multi-threaded performance. And the cherry on that particular cake is the CUDA and OpenCL graphics acceleration. So if you have a qualified graphics card, and we've opened these wide up now in CC, so you can actually use a variety of different both AMD and NVIDIA cards. If you have a supported card in your system, you can actually get all of your visual effects accelerated and running on the graphics card. So we'll come on to more of that in a minute. But suffice to say, to get the system set up correctly, you need it to say down here in Project Settings, General, it needs to say GPU acceleration, either CUDA or OpenCL. Because I have an NVIDIA Quadro card installed in here, I don't need the OpenCL acceleration. If you want to know more about what graphics hardware you've got installed in the system, on a Windows machine, if you right-click on my computer, go to Manage, Device Manager, Displays, wherever that is down here. I've got a Quadro K2000M. I happen to know that's got 2 gigs of VRAM, but typically you'll have some kind of utility in the system, so the NVIDIA control panel here, for example. If I open that up, I can see if I go down to System Info and click on here, it tells me right here, 2048 megs or 2 gigs of VRAM. This is what's quite important. You need to have a gig of VRAM to have a compatible card. If you're on a Macintosh, you can find that information out if you go to the Apple menu, About This Mac. You go to, I think, More Info, and then you click up to Displays. This is just a screenshot of a colleague's laptop, and again, that tells us here he's got the GeForce 650M 1024 meg of graphics. If you have less than 1024 meg, obviously you may have found there's ways on the internet of actually force enabling the GPU acceleration. It will, in many cases, make it slower. Not worth trying if you don't have a gig of VRAM. But when you do, the sky's the limit. I can add whatever I like on these clips in terms of effects. So I've just introduced a shot of a bus that is driving from right to left across the screen. I'm going to do a few things with this. I've cut it up into 3 sections, and you can see we've got these new through edit indicators now that show me where I'm looking at one shot with an edit added to it. So I can heal the shot and join it back up again to get rid of it. But it's useful visual feedback. Also, you notice I've got these little FX icons. Now if I zoom in, you notice that one's purple and these are grey. Now, this gives me a wealth of information about clips. Before, it wasn't possible to tell whether this clip had any effects on it or not without click selecting it and going up to the effects controls. In this case, I won't click on it, I'm just going to go ahead and press D. That's a new keyboard shortcut for highlight and select the clip that's underneath my playhead. Dead useful. Now I can go to the effects over there and I can see by default I've got my what we call intrinsic effects on there, motion, opacity and time remapping. And I could drill down into the parameters of each to check, but I know by virtue of the fact that that icon is grey, I have not changed any of those parameters. That's what that grey colour is indicating to me. If I was to go in there and just drop the opacity of that shot, and this is something that you might have done by accident if you tweaked a keyframe by mistake, that's going to come up now in yellow. That just says to me, you have changed one of your intrinsic parameters. So if you know you hadn't intended any of that, quite easy then to just reset that and go back to there and end up with a plain plugin that goes to grey. The purple icon tells me, if I press D again, select clip under the playhead, I have introduced some visual effects plugins from my effects palette down here. Now, just a little more on these effects. If you click on this icon, it will show you all of the visual effects that are accelerated. And by that, this refers back to this GPU acceleration we touched on before. All of those effects are going to run on my K2000 CUDA card, which means if I was able to play the video without the effects, I'll be able to put 2 or 3 simultaneous effects on each layer of my video without dropping any frames. So I'm set to half quality playback here. This green dot here is the indicator of whether any frames have dropped during playback or not. And for those of you who haven't used Premiere for a while, you'll see we've greatly simplified the interface here. Full 16:9 play windows, both on the source and program window. I've actually completely turned off both of my button rows here, but you can get those back if you go up here and go show transport controls, just in this context menu up here. But we've really decluttered the interface. All the little spin down menus, the little drop downs and things that you never used, all gone now, and we've really tidied up the way that things work. We've also made a lot of improvements in the timeline, as I say, with visual effects indication, join through edits indication as well. More of that in a while, but we can actually customize some of these track headers, but I'll get to that. For now, I'm going to look at what we can do in terms of the effects capability of my system. So, on this shot here, if I go up to the effects window, you'll see I've added both a 3-way color corrector and a warp stabilizer. So if I turn on the 3-way color corrector, you'll see straight away I've really accentuated the red in that section of the clip where the bus is. So obviously I've overdone it for effect, but if you really want to make that bus stand out of that shot, that's how you would do it with something like the 3-way color corrector. So if I open that up, if I hit the reset button up here, I'll show you how I arrived at that result. I went down into the secondary color correction segment down here, the subsection. Something else we did in CS6 was kind of tidy up the way this 3-way worked, because it had all the functions you would need within it, but they were all a bit all over the place, and now they're kind of easier to find. So under secondary color correction, I'll just select the eyedropper here and I'll go and select a color of red. Then I'll go to show mask. And what it's beginning to do is build a mask for me of the different patterns of red, or the different shades of red that are in the color of that bus. So if you just keep adding a few different shades that you want to come up within that mask, just add maybe one more right at the front of the bus down there. That was one too many, I think. There we go. We've ended up introducing the rest of our shot in there. That's good enough for a mask on the bus. I can turn off show mask, and what I can go then is into the saturation of the secondary. Up here, I can just begin to crank up some of those levels, you see. So master, shadow, mid, and highlight. Really overdo it to labour the effect. I've got a luma setting down here as well. I can slide that up too. There we go. And then that's just kind of before and after. If you want to just switch off any given effect on a clip, if you go up here and just click on the effects button, that's it before and after. And that will play back in real time. I'm still not going to drop any frames because those effects are loaded onto my GPU. Another thing I might want to do with this particular shot is stabilize the clip itself. So if I right click on there, if I go to effects and choose the warp stabilizer, let's drag that across. That's going to do some calculations for me. This started life in After Effects but was introduced into Premiere in CS6. It's doing an analysis of all of the pixels in each of these frames and finding out where they've moved frame to frame. It's then going to apply the correction vectors as a live effect. So what I've got here is smooth motion. Now it's basically going to make it look very much more like the camera was intentionally panning during the move. You've got some slight anomalies in there, so I could switch on detailed analysis as well. I won't do that. That'll spend more time on actually analysing the pixels and give you a much stiller frame. But it's great for using stuff that's just handheld and looks slightly wonky to be able to stabilise that out and actually achieve a nice stable result. In a minute I'm going to composite some more layers onto this, but let's just look at how the dynamic link feature works. So this is something that, again, that's been around a while in Premiere, but it wasn't until we moved across to this 64-bit world of CS5 and beyond that you had the ability to make most use out of the dynamic link function. So all I need to do then is right click on there. Those of you who haven't touched After Effects at all, this is a great introduction to being able to use it. I just select Replace with After Effects Composition, and that will create a comp for me that is totally linked to that clip in Premiere. And as soon as I buffer that into RAM, that will play back in real time in Premiere. So you don't really need to know much about After Effects at all, because you know that once it was open, it's created this composition here with one clip of video that's totally tied to what you did in the Premiere interface. So I can now go ahead and put any kind of effect on there that I may not have access to in Premiere. For example, if I go snow, select the snowfall effect, double click, And then that will add that onto my clip. So if I now go ahead and make more flakes, make them bigger, let's have some really biblical snow. There we go. It's definitely snowing in that picture now. So we'll just let that buffer into RAM. And as I mentioned, once that's loaded into RAM and pre-cached, all I need to do is Alt-Tab back over to Premiere. And that clip, you see, has updated completely dynamically. So any changes I make in one application will ripple through to the other. So I've now got, essentially, the clip is in two places with the snowfall on, and I've got a red color correction on there, and I've got a motion stabilizer, all operating in tandem. And you can see I'm still not losing any frames. So this is the performance of Mercury. Let's start to introduce a few more layers. The media browser in Premiere is also very capable of understanding native file types. So it's not just, you don't have to use Prelude. You can do all of your ingest in here. You're just constrained to a slightly smaller window to do it. But again, if I drill down into my footage and I go to some assets in here, I know I've got some tapeless media files in here. Let's go for something different this time. If I go for DVC Pro HD green screen, this is a shot that was shot on a completely different format of camera, actually in 720p. So if I bring that into my project across there, let me double click to load that up. I'm going to introduce that as a second layer on top of my sequence here. So you'll see first of all what Premiere has done is it's brought that clip in native 1:1 pixel ratio at 720. So I'm seeing a 720 overlay inside my 1080p sequence. So if I wanted to scale that up, it's not making any preconceptions or making any decisions about what it thinks I want to do. I have to manually choose to scale to frame size if I want. There's actually a preference in the software as well where I can decide to do that automatically with every clip I bring in. So this guy is shot against the world's worst lit, worst framed green screen, kind of by design, because I'm going to show you what the Ultra Key plugin does now. If I select that over to there and go to the effects controls up here, again you'll see I have an indicator in purple that I've added a visual effect on there. Similar to the secondary color corrector, I just select a green color there. If I actually get rid of the track underneath so I can see what I'm doing here, that's quite an ugly key. There's lots of areas where it hasn't really pulled that out at all. So let me switch to the matte created by the keyer. And I actually have a great setting inside Ultra Key called Aggressive, where I can just go in and get rid of, and it'll just tidy up that key all the way around there, which is great. So you can see I've still unfortunately got the problem that the shot wasn't framed hard against the backdrop. So if I use something like a garbage matte, drag that in there, I can highlight that and I can just actually manually crop out the rest of that matte. Bring that across here and tidy that up. Right, again now if I switch back to the composite out, there we go, I've got a much tidier key on that guy. So I can bring him back against the backdrop there, and I'm playing back even though I had all those effects already going on the second layer, including the nest with After Effects and the snow. I'm still able to play all this back in real time, and I'm scaling him to full screen as well. But let's just make him a bit smaller so I can do a bit more. This time I'm actually going to resize the image of him and move that to the bottom of the screen. So it's exactly how you would achieve the sign language keying workflows that you see on some shows on TV. There you go, now he's squeezed down right into the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Let's make this interesting. I mentioned that we have a completely open timeline in which I can mix any format. I'm going to now grab some red footage. So this is native 3K media. So if I grab this, double click on that, introduce that into my sequence as another layer. What I get now is the opposite. It's showing me a 1080p window within my 3K frame because my native sequence format is actually smaller than the media I'm trying to introduce into it. What I'm trying to get across here is that this format of your sequence, the sequence I'm working on here called bus, is entirely like a temporary placeholder. I can mix any kinds of video I want into it, and then that actually bears no relation to what I make my output format as well. So this is a completely flexible workflow. Any footage you've shot on anything from an iPad to a phone to a DSLR and whatever you want to deliver to, whether it's web video or broadcast, whatever you like, DVD, Blu-ray, we've got a fully native workflow that allows you to deliver all those formats. So this time again I'm going to choose scale to frame size, probably shrink that down a little bit as well. If I highlight motion, just pull the scale down. And let's park that in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, perhaps even a bit smaller still. It's a very, very high resolution image. Now you can see I've got 3 different layers of different formats, all at the same time, all in real time with no drop frames. So next I'm going to show you some more stuff about how we can actually introduce color looks over the top of a sequence now in Premiere Pro CC. We've actually introduced the Lumetri engine from SpeedGrade into Premiere. Here it is down the bottom. So I can actually put on some of these looks, these pre-baked looks that were available before. I can also put LUTs on as well if I want to compensate for the response of a camera and make the overall characteristics of a different camera available. So you've got ARRI LUTs in there and various other film stock LUTs to make things look like Fuji or Kodak or whatever else. But before I get to that, I've decided I don't really like this snow effect here. So if I right click on that and go Edit Original back in After Effects, I'm just going to remove the snowfall on there. But just to show you one other thing I could do, so rather than use the warp stabilizer that we played with earlier on, I'm actually going to remove that as well. This time what I'm going to do is a similar process in After Effects, but what I can do is right click on the clip and go Track Camera. This is a very similar process in the way that it analyzes the image to find out where the pixels have moved to. But rather than actually compensating for that for scaling and cropping the image, this is going to create a little star field of speckly coloured marks on the image itself that I can actually pin stuff to. So we'll just wait for that to finish. It's 33 frames of the way in. Rather than a conventional tracker which tracks a single point through an image, what the camera tracker actually does is tracks as many points as it thinks are relevant to you. So I can pin anything I want to this bus. If I go back to the beginning of the shot just here and I select some of these points inside on the side of the bus that it's created there, I can go and create solid and camera, and that actually gives me a solid object that follows the bus on the way through. So if I just scale that down a little bit in here, I'll just make that a bit smaller. It's slightly rotated in the wrong direction, but let's line it up there. And I can just stretch it out to match the bus. There we go. I could obscure and add or, do whatever I want at this point. That will actually follow the bus on the way, you see? That's just something else that you can do with motion tracking inside After Effects. Okay, so I said I would show you some of the color stuff in Premiere, and that I shall do. If we now go back to this sequence I've been working on here, you'll see that again the green object is also embedded in my Premiere sequence. If I go to New Adjustment Layer and load that up onto the top of there, I can now begin to add whatever I want onto that adjustment layer to change the overall entire look of this scene. So as I mentioned, if I go in and select the Lumetri effect in here, load that across, first thing it will do is ask me to find a LUT file. I have a bunch of them stored inside my SpeedGrade install. If I go .lut, it's going to find some of those for me. There we are. As I mentioned, different camera LUTs, Alexa V3, ARRI Universal, but if I select that, you see, it then just gives me a very desaturated, high contrast sort of appearance that corresponds to the look of that camera. So that's kind of a technical LUT that I can put on there. If I wanted to as well, though, as I mentioned, I can drill down into the Lumetri presets that I've got at the bottom here. And I've got various different looks I could work with, like bleach bypass, cinematic, or let's go for a nice sort of Get Carter London feel, so 70s 2, something like that. There you go. So I've used the Lumetri engine, a real-time process, to be able to put that overall artistic look onto my sequence. So now I'm actually just going to come out of this project and save some changes. And I'm going to show you the new dialog that we've created for Premiere Pro CC on the way into the application. So one of the most important settings you're going to see along here is Sync Now. If I click on that, it's actually going to retrieve the settings that I've saved in my cloud account. So this is really useful if you are using multiple machines, if you've set up the software in a particular way and you're going to go and log on somewhere else and you want to retrieve those settings. Dead powerful way of working. Also, we've actually introduced the ability to talk to an Anywhere server. So you'll hear more about this in the future, but this is actually our collaborative remote editing solution. This actually allows me to sign into an Anywhere server if I have access to one and edit remotely and stream the media across the internet or across certainly intranet sites at local corporate enterprises. So let me jump into this project that I've been working on here. I mentioned that we have overhauled the capability to relink media more straightforwardly. So if I go ahead and load this sequence, I'm sure many of you will have seen this screen before. All the media is missing from my sequence. So you could relink before, but it may involve a slightly arduous process of trawling all the way through your disks and manually trying to find the associated clips. We have fixed and overhauled the link media function completely, and it will now actually use the media browser as well. So I can relink all of those clips based on file name, extension, media start, tape name, or whatever I want. That actually would facilitate me being able to relink to different proxy media as well if I wanted to. All of those possibilities are available to you. If I now click locate, it's already found one of those shots for me, just based on the fact that it's inside the disk that I originally was last saved it to. So it's found a candidate for that clip that I'm going to relink to. Let's say, for example, you were in a situation where you had media that had lots of different clips with the same name, but you weren't actually sure which was the correct one. Because this now actually uses the media browser to help you link media, you can do a visual inspection of the clip before you commit to linking to it, which is kind of handy. So if I double click on there, it's going to link to all of the missing media that it could find inside that directory. There we go. My sequence is now online and available to be played back. So I mentioned a little more earlier on about clip indicators and about through edit indicators. I'm going to show you now how you can actually customize all of the track headers inside Premiere. So for starters, I can resize all of the video tracks together or independently. I can do the same with the audio down there. And I've actually got audio clip meters as well now, track meters rather, which is a very useful feature. But if I want to decide that I don't want half of these track headers on there, they're not useful to me, I can actually get rid of some of them. So next and last keyframe, don't want those. Link button, no, I'm not doing any sync locking or unlocking, let's get rid of that as well. And you can have a much more straightforward layout in the tracks, you see. So really all I got left is the track name, online, make a new keyframe, and toggle track output on and off. So that's useful to be able to tidy up the way that your timeline appears. I can also actually save these presets up here as well. Save presets, I've got one already saved there called My Heights. Manage presets, and these again are all settings that you can sync with you when you use the sync settings function that we looked at a second ago. We've also done a lot of work on our audio capabilities. So if I go over here to this sequence, I can look at the audio clip mixer, which is new. This is a really useful way for being able to balance the relative levels of clips in a timeline without getting into rubber banding or keyframe automation. So each of these clips that you see on here will have a discrete level available to it. So as I move along with my playhead again, the clip selected under the playhead only exists on A3. The faders disappear from all the other channels. So I can just boost or cut the level of that clip, you see. And on a clip by clip basis, when we go to the next one, I can just pull that down to a different level. Over here, we've actually got clips on 2 and 3 at the same time. I can balance them against each other. Very quick way of, if I'm doing a track lay, you know, and if I've got a bed of effects, music and Atmos and various different bits and pieces, I can do a basic balance on those by using the audio clip level meter. If I go to the audio main mixer itself and go to the master channel, we've introduced a couple of new plugins this time around. So if I go to special, we've got the loudness radar meter from TC Electronic. This is actually useful for scientific perception measurement of level. This is important in transmission quite often. Your instantaneous level in your meter doesn't necessarily tell you how loud your ear thinks the audio is over time, and that's exactly what the loudness radar will measure for you. So this allows you to be compliant with a number of different specifications for broadcast, cinematic output, and whatever else. If you don't want to spend too much time finessing your mix with dynamics and EQ and spending a long time actually getting the mix right, I shouldn't say this with a background as an audio engineer, but there's a great dynamics package in here now that we've just added as well under amplitude and compression. You've got the multiband compressor from Isotope. So if I bring up the interface for that as well, just down here, you can see this is a 4-band compressor that will operate within each band simultaneously and just really brings the mix to life and just kind of gives it a much more dynamic punch than it would have necessarily had before. And you've got great presets on there to achieve exactly what kind of sound you're looking for. So broadcast output, internet delivery, that'll be really quite heavily compressed so that the dynamics are quite narrow in terms of actually watching this stuff on a platform device or something similar. There we go, we can see that at work there.
Where is she?
I don't know.
So lots of new audio tools.
I don't know!
I mentioned as well format support, so again we're more or less up to date in terms of actually being able to ingest virtually any type of codec from different camera formats. We looked at mixing them on the timeline before. Now I'll show you how we actually might go about outputting something like that. So if I find my audio controls sequence in the bin here and select that for output, what I do is go File, Export, and this will bring up the export module in Premiere Pro. You can see there's a thumbnail preview of what I'm going to put out. I've got an almost exhaustive selection of different format types that I might want to deliver this video as. I've got MPEG for Blu-ray, DVD, I've got MXF for broadcast output, QuickTime, I've got various different presets and the like for outputting to platform and tablet devices. If I go ahead and export this now, this is going to lock out the interface of Premiere and produce a very quick export, but in so doing actually prohibit me from doing any further editing, which is why we would often use the Q function. If I hit that, it's going to farm the job out to the Adobe Media encoder. So this icon down here with it looks like rocks tumbling down the screen, it's going to add that job to my queue over here. You'll see, as I mentioned earlier, we have a bunch of new presets under broadcast here. I've got DNX, I've also got Apple ProRes capability as well on a Macintosh system, not available on Windows just now, but I can more or less output any type of flat video file that I might want. And we've subcategorized these system presets nicely and easily so you can find exactly what you're looking for. So I have a DV AVI output. Let's say in this case I want an Android phone version. It's going to add that to the list. I want also to send it back to a Panasonic P2 camera. Let's have an AVC Intra output. We'll add that there too. And just for good measure, I'm going to have a web video, and I'm going to send this to Vimeo at 720p. There we go. There's all my different outputs. So a raft of different formats available to you now. When you want to go and output that stuff, you just literally hit Start Queue, and it will turn out all 4 jobs in tandem, all completely concurrently. Get a thumbnail preview of all those jobs in action as well, so you can see all 4 of those jobs being rendered simultaneously. And it is using all of the processes and all of the CPU utilization available to it on my system as well. So fully multi-threaded, fully 64-bit capable. But as mentioned, this is a cooperative background transcode and render. So if I want to stop and carry on editing, I can just hit the pause button at any point, free up the CPU, and go back and carry on working inside Premiere. So an absolute raft of stuff there, features that were introduced all the way along from Premiere 5, so CS5, 5.5, 6, all the way through to the new Premiere Pro CC version. We haven't been sitting still, we've been going from strength to strength, and we've really got a very, very capable NLE editor there as part of your Creative Cloud subscription. So I hope you have fun playing with it, and at that I'm going to open it up to questions. Please ask your questions in the chat pod. Thanks very much for joining.